Hey, it's David here, and today we're going to talk about temptation. And we're also going to talk about how to overcome that temptation and what does Jesus tell us to do about that temptation. And then also at the end of the video, I want to discuss about, possibly being tempted to use others. Because could the world be using you to tempt others into sin, to drag them away from God? It's going to be an eye opener. We'll see. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through some passages, and then we'll get to Jesus, and then we'll keep on going. So the first one we're going to go to is James chapter 1, verses 13 through 15. And it says, "When tempted, no one should say, 'God has tempted me.' For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after the desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death." So for one, God does not tempt us. Okay, it says, clearly states, he does not tempt us. But we are tempted when, by our own evil desires, our own flesh, it tempts us. Then we are dragged away and enticed. And after that, the desire conceives, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. And we know also Scripture talks about the wages of sin is death. So if you're sinning, you're being paid with death. That's your payment. But then if you go on to, so how do we overcome that temptation? It's interesting. So if we go on to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, 11 through 14, or actually, I'm sorry, 12 through 14. And it says, "So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it." So I stopped there at 13. But if you look at that, the very first beginning of verse 12, it says, "If you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall." How many of us think that we are standing on a firm foundation in Scripture and our relationship with the Lord is firm? But this is saying, if we think we're standing firm, be careful. Okay? And then when we go down here, it says, Paul tells us that, but when you're tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. Well, what's that way out? Now, if you go to verse 14, he says, "Therefore, my dear friends, flee from idolatry." There's a key word there, is flee. This reminds me of Joseph with Potiphar's wife when she was trying to entice him to bed. What did Joseph do? He kept resisting. No, no, no. Finally, he fled. He literally turned and ran away. Most people would say, "Oh, this is great," and they're going to go and they're going to be enticed to temptation and they're going to sin. Joseph, he had the strength to turn and flee from that temptation. And then, so that's one key right there. And then what does Jesus tell us? So I'm going to go over to another book I have that shows you all the Scripture together. And it's interesting because Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record what Jesus does when they're in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus goes away and prays. And he comes back, finds his disciples sleeping, goes away and prays, finds them sleeping. But it's interesting what Jesus tells. So if you go to Matthew 26, he says, "Could you men not keep watch for me for 1 hour?" He asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Go on to Mark 14. It says, "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Go to Luke 22. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." It's interesting that Jesus is saying that because I'm reading this, I'm like, what's the temptation? What are they being tempted of doing? But he tells them to get up and watch and pray so you do not fall into temptation. He didn't, and Jesus never says watch and pray so temptation never comes, because it's going to come. He says so you don't fall into it. So you don't go into it. Spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I also look at that as a spiritual. He's telling us about spiritual. Like, do we get lazy with our reading time, with our prayer time? Think about it with yourselves. Do you? I know I have. I know sometimes in the morning, it's like, I just don't want to do it. But you got to get that strength to just get in there and do it. Get in Scripture. Pray. Do it throughout the day. Don't stop. Don't just do your morning reading. Oh, I was in scripture this morning. I'm done. I prayed in the morning. I'm okay. I don't think so. You got to pray, constantly pray. Wake up. Get up. Pray so you don't fall into that temptation. So now this leads me to, which interesting is could the world be using you to entice others to sin, to tempt them to sin? And so if we go to some verses, actually, I need this one. We'll go to Romans. This is going to be in Romans 14. And we're going to, looking at my notes here, I have a little note card here. But Romans 14, verses 19 through 21. And Paul tells us, "Let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. All food is clean, but it is wrong for a man to eat anything that causes someone else to stumble. It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything else that will cause your brother to fall." And I look at that passage, and I also take that above food. But drink is a big one, too. Because it could be anything. What are you doing that could be causing someone to stumble? What words are you using that might make someone stumble? What actions do they see you doing that they might think, oh, that's okay, I can do that, but they're actually going to be tempted to sin because what you're doing is wrong. And he talks about, food and drink wine. If your friend is sober for a year, and hey, let's go out to grab something to eat. Do you, hey, order a beer or wine or whatever? Even though if you want it? Or do you overcome it and say, no, hey, I don't want to make my friend stumble. I don't want it on that table. I don't want his thoughts to even think about drinking again. So you could be being used, if you take that beer, could be enticing him and tempting him that, hey, maybe I can drink. It's something for you to think about. And then if we go on over to, I'm going to switch over. So all those verses were from the NIV. I'm going to go to the ESV for just this last passage. And it's Matthew 18. What is it? Yep, Matthew 18, verse 7. It says, and this is Jesus speaking, "Woe to the world for temptations to sin, for it is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the one by whom the temptation comes." Woe to the one by whom the temptation comes. Don't let the temptation come from you to destroy your friends. The way to do that, flee yourself from temptation. Watch and pray. Get into that prayer, guys. Get into Scripture. Be grounded in it. And you can still be firm, like Paul says, and fall. But get into it. Pray, pray, pray. I cannot stress that enough, guys. So, just want to give you those thoughts to think about. Again, go back over those scriptures. I'll have them in below so you guys can view it. And that's all I got for you today. Until next time, stay grounded in the Word, guys. I love ya. Peace. I'm out.